The Marinade.
There's no O in Marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone Marinade. The
That's
Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle.
The day was nearly over. They were hosing down the halls when they caught sight of her body in the rushes and the mud. She lay where she had fallen. They had hunted high and low. When I had come early, she'd been covered up.
Welcome to The Marinade with Jason Earle, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. This is episode 111, and our guest is the legendary John Doe. John Doe is a singer, songwriter, poet, actor, and multi-instrumentalist, perhaps best known as co-founder of the seminal 1980s LA punk band X. The influence of X on generations of musicians cannot be overstated. John has gone on to release wonderful solo records, including his latest, Fables in a Foreign Land, which was released on May 20th, 2022. We talk about that record, his time with X, and just really go deep on creative process during this conversation. Everyone, it is a huge honor to bring you my conversation with John Doe. Hey, John.
What's happening?
Chilling, man. Excited to speak with you. Thank you so much for doing this.
I'm sorry I'm a little late, but the last interview went over a little bit.
It's all good. It's all good. And please let me know if I start to go over anything, because I have so much to talk with you about, and I'm so thrilled for this opportunity.
It's all good.
Wonderful. Well, man, I've been listening to Fables in a Foreign Land for a few weeks now, your forthcoming record, and buddy, it is wonderful. I mean, just such a fantastic piece of work. And so I'm really excited for folks to hear it. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you for this amazing record.
Well, you're welcome. I'm totally flattered. I mean, yeah.
There's just like this whole kind of, it creates this world, right? It creates this kind of, it puts you in a place, and I'm really interested to unpack sort of how it came about, because there's a vibe to it, and there's something about you with just bass and drums. That's pretty much it, right? I mean, you're your guitar, bass, and drums on this thing. There's something about that is both spare and also so full, right? Like there's such a fullness to the record, but at the same time, it's just those kind of three main elements or four main elements, however you want to look at it. And so I'm curious about that decision, to go with you, bass, drums, and then sort of like using that as a jumping off point to talk about how this record came together.
Right. Well, I had the idea to do this folk trio, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and worked with some people that I'd worked with on earlier records that were more kind of rock or blues, country, that had a lot more had more instruments and was more produced and overdubs, and like a record the way people have made records for the last 20, 30 years or more, 40 years or more, 50 years. And so then we never really got that thing that I had in mind. But it was good. It was good, but we never really got there. And getting locked down and just going out to Kevin Smith's, the bass player's backyard, just to do something, to remind ourselves that, yeah, we play music, because neither one of us were on tour. And then we asked Conrad, who we'd played with before, Conrad Chakroon, to come in and do that. And there's in recording and in playing, everybody's got to fill up every space. It's just like, oh, here's a little space, I'll put this guitar in there. Oh, here's a little space, I'll put a piano in there. And here's a little space, I'll put some, whatever it is, pedal steel. And it's beautiful, but sometimes it's just too much. And I kind of got, I got kind of tired of it. And then with lockdown, we just had the three of us, and we weren't inside. It was all outside. So it was just the acoustic instruments, and we had the time to kind of work. They were the right players, and we had time to work on this sort of sound that we came up with, bit by, just bit by bit, and applying it to either an X song or another cover song or, whatever. It's like, oh yeah, this has, the reason that it sounds full to me is because it's asking the audience, the listener, to fill in the gaps. Like, okay, because you saying I created this world that you can just kind of roam around in, that's like the biggest compliment. That's exactly what I think a lot of people want to create in art. It's like, I just want you to come into the world that I've kind of envisioned. And if you do that, then my job's done.
I've been spending mornings with it, and just sitting with these headphones on in front of my computer, listening, and they're to further illustrate that point of how you can get lost in it, is like, it just, everything else kind of seems to go away, right, when I'm listening to that record. And I think that's interesting too. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about. I want to put a pin in the idea of talking about some of the kind of lyrical themes on the record. But since you brought up space, and we're talking about space, what, you've been doing this a long time, and you've made all kinds of different records with all kinds of different people. What kind of lessons have you learned? Like, where did you learn those lessons? I guess I mean to say, about space and where to put things, and when you should give the break for the listener. Is that something that you sort of just develop through practice, or are there moments that kind of you've learned lessons about space specifically in music?
It's a constant learning process to trust your intuition. And everybody who's made anything, no matter what it is, has listened to somebody else, but in their heart they thought, that's not right. And then you go ahead with it anyway because they make a good case for it, and you get convinced, and then it's done. And then you hear it or look at it for the first time, and you go, yeah, I still hate that part.
Yeah.
I sort of hate myself for listening to that person who convinced me. In the last three records, for sure, like Keeper and The Westerner and this one, the Keeper was kind of my tribute to 70s songwriter stuff. There's, I could say that, well, this one was influenced by Joni Mitchell, and that one was influenced by the band, and this one was influenced by, Neil Young, even though it all sounds like the same band. But and then The Westerner was there were guest singers, but pretty much a core band. So I just think I've been, traveling towards this economy and space, and it's like putting into practice that old saying that you think, which is like less is more. You find out the actual definition of that saying.
Wow. Okay, so I'm glad you brought up The Westerner, because I wanted to talk about it a little bit, and kind of in comparison to this. It's really fun. This has been so much fun to prepare for a lot of reasons, and one is like, I was going into this pretty ignorant about 70s and 80s punk music in LA. Like, I didn't know the first, I didn't know shit. Right. And
Well,
I grabbed your book. I was born in 1980. So it's like
right.
a history project for me in a lot of ways. Right.
Nice.
So I've been reading your book and I've been going down the road, listening to those records and having like, it's been super fun because it's also kind of shattered my preconceived notions of what that music was like.
Mhm.
And specifically, I was shocked by the instrumentation and the complexity of some of those songs from X and from tons of other bands that I ended up getting into. But also in this process, there's been these kind of beautiful kind of cosmic moments or whatever. Like I was at the record store and I just my local record store here in Orlando, and I was just thumbing through the used CDs and I found a copy of The Westerner a few weeks ago. And so I was like, well, this is perfect. You know, I've been wanting to do this research anyway. And I spent a lot of time with that before I sat down with Fables in a Foreign Land. And
Right.
there's certainly some commonalities between the records, but they're different in many ways too, as I
Yeah.
listen to them. And so I'm curious about sort of, you know, what you have to say about the difference in how you approach The Westerner, which is also a wonderful record, and then how you came into this record and the way that you approached this record creatively.
Well, you just you write a bunch of stuff and then you figure out how it fits together.
Mm.
That's how The Westerner came to be. I also reconnected with my friend Hal Gelb, who's one of the kind of godfathers of desert rock, they call it.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff that comes out of Tucson and Arizona. And I kind of love his take on psychedelia, because that also has a lot of space. And I was visiting a friend who was not doing too well, and he actually passed away right before we were recording. And so that was kind of dedicated to him. And then as this record was, taking shape, I'm okay with technology. I'm glad that we're talking on a fucking computer. However, what we gain versus what we lose, we don't know what that equation is, and I don't think we're actually gaining much because we're so disconnected from nature and So there were a few songs that could have taken place in the 1890s, and then I thought, oh well, why don't I, I'll try being disciplined. And yes, it's a bit of a concept record, but it doesn't have to be pretentious like a concept record. So hopefully I mean, according to you, I succeeded. So that's good.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think it is interesting. I like in the press materials, it talks about it being a concept album. And I guess, of course, it is, it takes place in the 1890s. And there is a theme to it. But if your goal was to not have it be too like self-important or something like that, or self-indulgent, it certainly is not.
Well, the other similarity between, what I relate to in music is when you're listening to a song that's elemental, that's like where it doesn't have to be, you can see the time and place, but it doesn't have to be a specific year or a specific culture. There were a few songs on that on the Westerner record. There are a few songs on the early X records, or any of those where you do have a time and a place, and you can see people, and there's images, and it's cinematic and stuff like that. But it's kind of like, there are one or two people, and then there's a house, and then there's there's something happening between those people in that house, and so that appeals to me. And whether it's cat power or just pick somebody, you can usually go there, and that's what appeals to me. That's what I strive for in writing and singing a song.
That yes, right. Like, isn't that's such those are the pieces of work that hit so hard, the ones that might have a theme, for example, the 1890s, and still become so universal, right? Something that we can relate to so well. And I'm interested in what you said about the tech balance, because it's definitely a constant struggle for me. And I'm with you. Like, I'm clearly not anti-tech. I'm, on this MacBook Air, brand new MacBook Air, and I have my brand new iPhone in my pocket. But dude, 9 months ago, I had a literal flip phone, and now I've gone completely in the other direction. And because to me, like, striking that balance is hard, and I don't do it well. I don't think, but I'm constantly working on it and trying to figure it out. Right. So I'm wondering
that's all we can do, man.
That's what I wonder is, like, do you have a specific practice that you have where, like, I don't touch the computer till a certain time, or anything like that you do to sort of process it in that way?
I just try to be aware of how much, and realize that it's just that dopamine hit that you're looking for. And, you don't drink all the time, although, if you drink alcohol, it's fun sometimes, but that, like, if you have more than 2 drinks, you're probably going to regret it.
Right. Right.
So no, I'm not that disciplined to not do something until a certain time, but I always am kind of have some awareness and intent to say, okay, that's enough of that, and kind of put it down.
That's a couple of times you brought up discipline, and on Chris Shiflett's podcast, Walking the Floor, a few years ago, you were talking about, it was right about the time, I guess, that Under the Big Black Sun, your book came out, and you were talking about, and I don't want to misquote you here, but basically you were like talking about how much work it is, and sort of talking about, like, not having done this before because it was so much work. And then you're just talking about discipline, right. But like you've done so much, and you continue to do so much. So I'm interested in that sort of that process for you. Clearly you work a lot, and like it. So are you you have a routine, or are you somebody who has to just sort of work in a flurry when the inspiration strikes? Like, what does all that on a sort of more granular level look like for you?
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with like life force. Some people are cool just hanging out and just enjoying their lives, and other people have something that drives them to do more, and it's probably not better or worse either way. I'm not that disciplined, except when there's like something to do. When once we started doing this rehearsal once a week, then it was like, and maybe by we started in April of 2020, and by August it was like, oh, we've got a project now, we've got something we can do. And so then it was like, okay, I'm in, I'm full on looking through my notebooks that I've kept for the last 2 or 3 years, and going to try to assemble this. As far as writing, I did have a regimen of getting up and writing first thing in the morning when I was working on that book, and I would and the one after it. But I mean, I didn't want to be the authority on punk rock from 77 to 82. I didn't want that weight. And once we came up with the idea of having other people write, then we realized, excellent, we don't have to do all the work.
So this
is a good thing. And because then you get a true perspective from somebody else. Then you get Jane Weedland's perspective, or all the different people, Henry Rollins' perspective, and so yeah, it worked out.
It did work out. I like that choice a lot. I think it's really interesting to see it from those different perspectives, because you're not just getting it from the musicians either. You're getting it from people who were running the clubs and people who were music journalists, and like you're getting,
Yes.
you know, a lot of different perspective on that. And all of those people are so important to a scene, whatever that scene is. And that
Exactly.
particular scene was so influential and continues to be so influential that it's super important that you got those perspectives. Right.
Yeah. Well, and then the second book, we spread out a little bit more and got Allison Anders and Shepard Fairey and Tim Robbins and Tony Hawk and people that took whatever that music for the second 5 years was and kind of applied it to their artistic, you know, vision. So they could talk about that. They could, you know, show the reader how that influenced them and what they did with it.
One of the things that comes out, kind of building on what I was just saying about everybody being involved in the book, is that like one of the things that comes out is the aesthetic of the scene at that time in the late 70s and early 80s. And then the enduring influence of some of those things I see a lot now, and it's fun to me and it's interesting, but like zines making a comeback, for example.
Yes.
And you know, seeing flyers for shows as I was flipping through as I was like reading through and as I was flipping through some of the later pages, I was seeing some of these the examples of flyers in there from back then, and how much that is being emulated now when I'm, you know, going around to music venues here in Orlando, even in today. And I'm really interested in like whether or not you see something today that sort of has that kind of influence. If a scene like that exists in whatever that modern sense would be.
I don't know if it's, I'm not young enough to be part of that, and that's good. But I do know that there are a few bands young bands that take some of that, add in some of the sound from Seattle or Detroit, you know, in their perspective rock and roll heydays. And you know, they're doing their thing, and they all kind of know each other, and they, you know, tour together and things like that. A couple bands like that are Skating Polly, who we've toured with, and Exene was produced one of the records when they were really young. The band Surfboard is another one. Great woman who's the lead singer of theirs. There's this band Shannon and the Clams, who now is getting pretty well known, which understand the ethic of kind of songwriting, and they know punk rock. They don't necessarily play punk rock, but you know, they're influenced. They've got that in their vocabulary and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's also some like folk singers, kind of young blues singers that are doing really well with that as well. There's a woman named Sunny War, who's from LA, just recently moved to Nashville, and there's a guy here in Austin called Buffalo Nichols.
Love him. And
yeah, he's fucking good. He's legit.
He opened for the Drive-By Truckers back in October in Minneapolis, and I went to the show. Just went in totally cold. Had no concept of who he was, and just blew my mind.
He's legit, man. So
you moved to Austin not that long ago, right?
It was about 5 years ago. But you know, the other thing, I think I don't know if people making flyers are emulating as much as they're just like, this is an easy way to make a flyer. Like you cut out some picture that is a like social commentary, because you just can't believe that this is like reality, because it's so skewed. It's so like, really, you know, having Ron DeSantis as your fucking governor, you know, we've got another, you know, we've got the competing Marvel comic villain
Yeah.
in a motherfucking wheelchair, who's just like, nobody seems to get it. That his whole policy of doing these secondary inspections at the Mexican border, the U.S. Mexico border, is like, you are fucking everybody, and you're creating a worse like inflation problem and supply chain problem, all this stuff, and nobody seems to like want to call him on his bullshit. So I think that all those sort of elements are like easy fodder, and you can cut them out and you can paste them up and you can go to a Kinko's and Xerox up a bunch of shit, and it's not, you don't have to be a fancy graphic artist.
Right. Oh, so what keeps you from doing like something more like what you just like? I mean, today the news is full of DeSantis was up to some just crazy fuckery today. Like he was on one today, even more so than he normally is. And like what? Yeah, I mean, it's like bad satire or something, like a dystopian satire is what's happening. And it's interesting too, because I think this is the thing you mentioned, not calling them on their bullshit. But what's interesting to me is like Florida's a purple state. Like it's a complicated melting pot of a place. It's not like he won by 20,000 votes or something when he ran for governor. And there's like 70,000 Disney employees or something, which is interesting. And might have something to do with what happens next. But yes. It's really interesting to me thinking about as an artist, and you have been an artist through several different kind of political climates. What stops you from doing sort of a more topical, protest record, so to speak? Is that something that interests you at all? Or is that something that maybe isn't something that you're into?
I don't think I'd be very good at it.
Oh, interesting.
Exene wrote The New World and I Must Not Think Bad Thoughts, which are probably the most political, songs that we did. I don't know. Yeah, I guess I try to, vote with my dollars and vote, at the voting booth. And that's about it. I don't think I'd be good. I like bigger, I like, things that aren't topical. Exene was smart in not mentioning Ronald Reagan in either one of those songs, because then you can apply it to, it was better before they voted for what's his name. There's always another what's his name. True.
They just seem to be a little more open about their bigotry these days than they used to be.
Seems like they can get away with it. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it is wild. In Fables, with Fables in a Foreign Land and being set in such a specific kind of time and place, did you do research? Like, was it something that you were just sort of trying to channel from what you'd experienced and read and consumed before, or were you like, reading things about the 1890s and watching films set then and so forth?
No, I did not do a academic kind of research on it. I did listen to a little more string band music and the Mississippi Sheiks and some things like that, but it was just my version of folk music. Yeah, I just kind of used imagination and what would it be like. That's how maybe the song See the Almighty happened, because we all have that feeling of like being forsaken. We all have like, why me, God,
Yeah.
What's the Judy Blume book?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Oh, it's like, hello, God, it's me, Marjorie, or whatever it's called. I can't. It's a famous kids book, which is basically asking the same question.
I wonder if that one was like banned for me. I read a lot of Judy Blume, but I grew up in the Baptist church. I wonder if that one was like kept from me.
maybe so. But yeah, it wasn't academic. I've been sort of fascinated by Native American culture, fascinated by some, like pre-industrial things and or pre-industrial stories. And yeah, so I pretty much just used what I had and let the imagination take over.
Very interesting. What is it about the West that inspires you? You've briefly touched on that when you talked about the Westerner earlier. But like, what is it about, you've lived out West for a long time now. It certainly is a theme that comes up in your work. What is it about?
I think it's possibilities and freedom and space. Yeah. And I love the fact that there's, within all this reckoning that we've been going through, that there's, a bigger story to be told at this point. That it's not just like, here's your cowboy story, here's your Native American story, here's your, Black experience story. There are all these other sides to history that are coming out. That's it's going to be difficult, but it's ultimately more balanced and good.
Oh, I love that. It's so important. I 100% agree with you. And I think it's, this has especially come to the forefront fucking here in Florida with basically huge parts of history being banned, not being allowed to be taught in schools, books being banned from being taught. Beautiful pieces of work like the 1619 project, which I recently finished, and that built on years and years of work that I've been doing with my day job in terms of built my understanding a little bit deeper, right, of things that I've worked on as an educator for almost 15 years. But it is really interesting to think about the idea that it is messy and that it's necessary, but also that it is happening, right? So like sometimes I feel despair when I see the headlines, but that we are in a public fashion wrestling with these things that we maybe as a society, I would say as a society, have not even come close to addressing. So there's maybe a little bit of hope there too, in the idea of zooming out a little bit. And that can be the place where instead of a topical record, kind of a record with bigger themes can be so important.
Yeah. Let's hope so. I mean, people have just got to take their lumps and wise up and get rid of their egos so that they can accept that stuff. Yeah.
Speaking of taking lumps, thinking back to thinking back to the punk scene in the 70s and 80s, and then late 70s and 80s, and then all the way through to today, what creative lessons have you learned through that time, especially as your music has gone in different directions and come back in some ways, and you've done a lot of different things, and not only your music, but I do also want to kind of get into some other aspects of your creative life. Like how has your creative process sort of evolved over that time?
Trying to work smarter, not harder. And I know that's a overused phrase, but at this point, when X goes on tour, we're not putting shows back to back to back to back to back for, 6 weeks at a time. We'll play hard, but have a day off after 3 or 4 or 5 shows. And if we have a long drive, then we'll try to play a nicer place and stay in a little bit better hotel. I mean, whatever we can afford and still, make money, to keep our career going. Yeah. And I think the same thing goes for the creative thing, is to, kind of wait until you feel you got the time and the space to make something, and then really hunker down and do it. So yeah, and and feeling really grateful that everybody, say in a band setting, or if you're going to work with just, on a solo project, that people want to do it, that people still have the interest and the health and all that kind of stuff to do it. I've had to look for some substitutes for this trio, because Kevin Smith, the bass player, plays with Willie Nelson. And of course, we defer to Willie Nelson because if you don't, you're going to go to hell.
Yeah, right.
or something bad, something very karmically bad is going to happen to you. But anyway, and that's his main gig. But I've called a few drummers and a few bass players, and they're saying like, yeah, I'm not really playing live that much anymore. After the last couple of years, I had to, do some other stuff, and I can't take the time out to go and play, 3 or 4 shows with you here and there. And it's like, that's cool. They're still doing music. They're just, doing more studio work, or they're, trying to, write songs for a publishing, group or whatever. So it's interesting.
That is interesting. In some ways depressing, but at the same time, as long as they're still finding creative work in some way and work that fulfills them.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the other thing about this whole couple of years that's been interesting, is just how much it has. And this comes through in Fables in a Foreign Land, how it created this space for us to have to, like, we didn't have a choice. We had that space, and where we ended up going with it. I mean, my life is way better today than it was pre-pandemic, like way better.
Really?
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Everything about it's better. I mean, because I was forced to stop and go like, is this job that I had serving me? Right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. And so I found a new one, and that one's awesome. And then that one might be coming to an end soon because it was created for the pandemic, and now people are pretending like there is no pandemic. So I might have to find something else, and I'm kind of excited about it. I'm kind of excited about the prospect of like, I'm now forced in this other direction. And before, I'm such a creature of habit that I would have probably stayed in the particular lane that I was in, if not forced outside.
Right.
Which kind of makes me curious about all the things that you've done as an actor and as a poet and as a songwriter, all these different things that you've done, like how you make those choices of where to put your energy. Because we only have a certain amount of time, and creative capital.
Yeah. Well, you have to go where the work is. And I, for doing solo stuff, I kind of look at the calendar or look at my watch and go, oh my God, it's been 5 years since I made a record. I guess I'm gonna get off my ass and do this. Although we're touring all the time and things.
That's funny.
As far as poetry, I actually have a poetry group that I get together with online once a month. We have a Zoom call. And they're people that I've known for years, people that I went to school with back in Baltimore. But I just started doing that during the pandemic. I think making those choices, it does sort of tangentially relate to the new record, but because at the very beginning, the person narrator has to leave and knows that they're never going to come back because there's nothing to come back to. That's done. That thing is over. And then it was a lucky coincidence or just fate that a lot of those topics were about isolation and loneliness and then, oh shit, look at us. We're isolated and lonely and can't hang out with people. So that was kind of rewarding in thinking that if it's going to have a dark theme like that, then people could relate to it and they could maybe find some, find something in that.
And that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that aspect of the pandemic, the idea that a lot of us did have to leave things. And like I said, for me, I went to something better, so that makes it easier to leave something behind. But that is always difficult to wrestle with, that leaving a thing and being comfortable with that thing's not there anymore.
Yes. there's a push and pull between comfort and adventure.
Yeah.
Do you want to have an adventure, or do you want to just stick with your comfort?
Right.
It's hard. It's really hard to, venture out and not know where you're going to go or what's going to happen.
So
It takes something.
Yeah. Is there like a practice with that you do, like for you personally, in terms of dealing with that tension? Is there anything that you do to process that?
Yes. Every morning I tell myself that I'm going to be open, and I'm going to be, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to, be gentle and generous and grateful.
Wow.
And I don't know. I mean, it's just a reminder. But having seen people in later stages of life that have contracted and end up living in a very small world, I know that that's not what I want to do. And it happens a lot. And it's really, it's real, and it's understandable because people get scared and they don't understand what's going on. But if you can continue to expand, that's my hope, is I can continue to see new things and not be afraid of them, and try to understand them, and expanding rather than contracting.
Man, that's really hitting home. Just thinking about people in my life who are at that place where their lives have contracted so much and they're old, and trying to learn lessons from that and not be that, because I think I am predisposed in some ways to contracting. It's not necessarily being closed-minded, but sort of like in a control aspect, to be able to control my life, I guess is what I mean. Right. I'm definitely open to new ideas, but, and probably always will be. I expect I always will be, but the idea of like letting go, because there's a certain level of having to let go of sort of control of your own circumstances, to be in that place where you're not contracting.
Yeah. It takes a lot of energy to maintain control.
It does.
It's a lot easier to say, oh, fuck it, it'll figure itself out. The one thing I've learned in the last 5 years or so is, if there's a particularly thorny incident that I feel like it should be resolved, I'll just let it go for like a day and a half and just see if something else comes in to resolve it for me. If there's like something that I'm, can't quite figure out with a band member, or something is going on, and I feel like, oh God, man, I got to get in there, and I gotta figure out how this is going to all play out. I gotta do something. And it's like, just hold on a minute, just see what happens. And then sometimes they'll come back and say, actually, I see your point of view, or how about this? And I go, oh, thank God. I didn't have to get in there and make the, recipe for this solution. It just happened. Or the gig, or like, maybe let's say you're like, should we play this show? Should we do this thing? Should we not do this thing? And then the thing gets canceled. And you go, oh, great. I avoided this whole like confrontation and all this like back and forth and this and that and everything. It's like, oh, good. Something interceded. I didn't have to.
Oh, that is so great.
It's a lazy man's way of letting things resolve.
I don't know. I feel like there's a certain prudence to that approach. And, if you let it go too long, then maybe you're getting lazy. But just to provide, bringing it back to space in music, but also space in life, and help making sure that, and the lack of urgency that I felt during the pandemic, especially the height of it, when things were still mostly locked down everywhere but Florida.
Yes.
Is that like, I didn't feel that sense of urgency that I normally would feel about even small things. And so that helped me to have more space to think, which then positively impacted so many other aspects of my life. So I think there's not necessarily a lazy approach, but like a prudent approach to the idea of just giving a little bit of space for things to kind of play out before having to make a decision. I love that. I'm going to take that. Stealing
Sure.
that.
Yeah, I'm in.
John, this has been great. And I don't want to take too much more of your time, but you mentioned some bands earlier that, especially some young bands that you have been into. We always end on what you're getting down on. So that is the art that has you inspired. That could be music that you're listening to. It could be a book that you're fired up about, or maybe even something that you're making, film, whatever it is. Like, what's got you fired up right now?
Well, all those artists that I talked about. There's another guy named Trey Burt.
I love Trey Burt.
Yeah.
Oh
my
God.
He's really good. At some point this year or next year, we're going to, Grantley Phillips and Kristen Hirsch and I are going to do the Exile Follies again. And that's just kind of like the three of us just playing individually and together, doing a tour. We might even record something. I worked on a movie in Florida, and it's up in St. Augustine.
Cool.
It's a remake of the film noir movie called DOA with Evan O'Brien. And we're trying to find a way to get that out, whether it's distributed or film festivals and stuff like that.
Very cool. I'm not familiar with that film. What can you say more about it? Is there?
Yeah, you can just look it up. It's a story of a guy who it's got a great beginning, and we rewrote the script. I didn't, but a friend of mine did. Tried to make it have more sense. And his favorite movie is Chinatown, so it's like powers at play, things at play that nobody really knows what's going on. Kind of a typical film noir movie, but it has the first similarity is the very beginning is this guy stumbles into the police department and says, "I want to report a murder." And you say, "Oh yeah, who got murdered?" And the lead guy says, "I did." And that's why it's called DOA, Dead on Arrival.
Yeah. And
then you go into flashback and you find out all the shit that went down and how it happened.
Very cool.
Yeah. And we did it in period. We did it like it was 1949. And, St. Augustine has got all that Spanish moss and it's all very old fashioned and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. It's perfect for that. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'm reading another book by Haruki Murakami, who's one of my faves. And
which one?
Yeah, I think that's I can't remember the title of it right now. I could run into my bedroom and
it's not a big deal. I've read What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, and
yes, that's a good one.
Yeah. And then Colorless Sakura Tazaki and his Pilgrimage of Years, another Murakami that I absolutely loved. But he's got so much. I need to pick. In fact, I'm just about done with your book, so that's a good inspiration to pick up. Maybe like I've never read Norwegian Wood, for example. So
it's a great love story.
Yeah,
really. He just really focused on, this relationship, and it's beautiful.
Do you Murakami? Obviously, he's just an amazing author. Are there particular authors or genres that you gravitate toward when you're reading?
Fiction.
Yeah.
I read very little nonfiction, but it's all within the simplicity and storytelling and that kind of thing. Yeah.
When you're reading fiction, are you mining it for ideas also, or are you just sort of like in the moment enjoying the experience?
I try just to enjoy it. Yeah. And if there's a particular moment or image, it might come back in I'm not taking notes.
Okay.
Saying, oh yeah, I'm going to steal that. I'm going to steal that.
Annotating, dog earing. Yeah.
No, I'm not going to do that.
John, this has been an honor. Thank you so much.
Well,
I really appreciate
absolutely.
you.
All right, Jason. Well,
Dude, I appreciate you so much. This has
till the
been
next
awesome.
time, I'll try to get down to Florida.
Oh yeah, that would be great. I would love to see you live. So hopefully that happens.
All right, man.
Have a great night.
Take care. Yeah, you too.
See ya.
My sins and all my secrets burn like fat inside my chest. I could tell you that I loved her more than I could love myself. I swore that I would never harm a hair upon
John Doe, y'all. Thank you so much, John. Thank all of you for listening. Fables in a Foreign Land is available for purchase at thejohndoe.com. That's THEE johndoe.com. Give the record a spin. It is absolutely wonderful. The song you're hearing in this episode is Destroying Angels from Fables in a Foreign Land. The tune was co-written by John and Shirley Manson, Shirley of Garbage fame. There's also a wonderful Garbage version of that song. MarinadePodcast.com for all things The Marinade, including written pieces, photography, our online store, and more. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Tell a friend about the show. These are all free ways to support The Marinade. If you really like what we're doing, please consider joining our Patreon community. For just a few bucks a month, you can gain access to Patreon exclusive content like our show Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that shape my creative life and provide a window into the process of making The Marinade. I just dropped an episode of Jason's Journey where I'm kind of talking about the way I'm thinking about the show and its structure. If you're new here, I'm willing to bet that there are some John Doe fans who are listening to The Marinade for the first time. Welcome. Thank you so much for checking us out and for listening. That Patreon is a way to connect a little bit deeper with the show. Sometimes I'll put on bonus content. Van Plating and I had a wonderful conversation that just went too long for a future episode, so I released part of that on Patreon. Jordan Foley and Thomas Wynn talked to me about the process of making Jordan and his band The Wheelhouse's record. That's up there on Patreon. You can actually check that out for free if you want to just kind of get a little taste of what the Patreon is like. I also post what I'm getting down on, which is an examination of the art that's inspiring me at the moment. Sometimes we get together for Patreon happy hours, patreon.com/Marinade Podcast. If you're interested, if you don't want to make that monthly commitment and you just go, hey, you know what, I really enjoyed this episode or that episode and I want to just throw a little tip that way, you can just Venmo or PayPal us if you want to do so. It's just at The Marinade. All the money goes right back into making the show, everybody. We're saving up to cover the Philly Folk Fest. I'd really like to get out to Iowa for Hinterland, and your contributions make that happen. But above all, just thank you so much for listening, everybody. There's a couple of new things with the show that I want to make sure everyone's aware of. I've been making a weekly title playlist. It's called Marinade Musings. You can find that on our social media, or you just go and type Marinade Musings into the title search bar. Title has a free tier now. I don't think everybody knows that. So if like you were holding back from using it because of the paywall, you can just pull up these things for free. You kind of have some limited capability because it is free, of course, and there are ads, but it's not like Spotify where you get tons and tons of ads. It's just every once in a while. I highly recommend Tidal if you haven't checked it out. They're not a sponsor of the show or anything like that. I just think it's a wonderful product that also pays people for their work, right? So you can kind of feel a little bit better about streaming that music. There is no substitute for physical copies. Of course, go to thejohndoe.com to get a copy of Fables in a Foreign Land and support artists directly as much as you can. But also, hey, we've got the access to the streaming, so Tidal is a good way to do that. My Marinade Musings is just like a short list of songs that I find interesting, some stuff I'm letting sort of marinate. So check that out, everybody, over on Tidal. The other thing I want to announce is that I've been I've kind of tried to, in the last year and a half or so, take my political thoughts off of Twitter and make them a little bit more nuanced and long form. So if you go to medium.com and type in The Marinade, or medium.com/@Marinade Podcast, you'll find some kind of some things that don't necessarily fit in the context of The Marinade proper, don't really fit necessarily on the website, but thoughts that I have about politics. I recently wrote something about being a teacher and facing the threat of gun violence as a teacher, and sort of my evolution politically when it comes to my thoughts about guns and gun policy in this country that I don't necessarily want to put in this space, but I also don't want to be silent about. So check that out if you're interested. Everybody, thank you so much. We've got Lainey Jones coming up next, the next episode. And then we have some things booked that are really exciting, really, really cool stuff coming up for the show. I'm so grateful for every single one of you who listens. Until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.